Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for the My Rounding monthly webinar series. Just a couple of housekeeping notes up front. All attendee lines are on mute. If you do have any questions, which we highly encourage, please enter those into the questions box in the right-hand panel. We'll be answering those at the end of the webinar. Also available in the right-hand side in the handouts panel is an ebook that we produced on the same topic that covers a lot of the same content. That is downloadable from that handouts panel again. Also, after the webinar today, a recording will be available of the presentation as well as slides. Those will be sent out in a follow-up email tomorrow. With that, let's jump right in. So my name is Katie Anthony. I'm the marketing manager at My Rounding, a Huron solution. I'm going to be your host for today. Joining me today, I welcome Steve Bachtel and Clayton Daly. Steve, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. My name is Steve Bachtel. I'm a senior director here with Huron and My Rounding. For the past 20 years, I've been working on patient experience and employee engagement, and I'm very passionate about using data analytics to drive change. I'm pleased also today to be joined by Clayton Daly. Clayton, if you could introduce yourself.
Yes, thanks, Steve. As Steve said, my name is Clayton Daly. I'm part of the team that analyzed the HCAHPS data to develop some patient insights that we'll discuss near the end of the webinar. So I'm extremely familiar with that domain.
Great. Well, thank you both for joining us today. I'm really excited about this topic. I think that it's going to be a huge help for everybody on the line. So what are we going to talk about today? As I mentioned, this is building off of the ebook content. So you are going to see some familiar things in there if you have downloaded that and read it already. But so we'll start out with a quick reminder of what value-based purchasing, or VBP, is and how we landed there. Next, we'll discuss the HCAHPS specifically using a handy analogy to hopefully clarify the rules, since this is very complex. And then we'll walk through different ways organizations are approaching HCAHPS with increasing levels of difficulty. So before we do that, we want to launch a poll question. And we just want to find out who you are. So if you wouldn't mind taking a quick moment to fill out this poll and just tell us what your role is within your organization. We'll leave this open for a few seconds. It looks like most people are already voting, which is great. And we have a good mix of people joining us on the call here. But not surprisingly, there are a lot of administrators and PX leaders.
And we have several others, which I suppose we should have been more specific in our options.
Well, what can you do when you only have 5 options put up there? All right, there's a couple more votes coming in, so if you haven't already, please go ahead and take that quick poll.
All right, so we're pretty evenly split between nurse and nurse leaders. We've got some dedicated patient experience department personnel. We've got some hospital administrators, and then a group of others, which I'd be fascinated to find out who's amongst that group. But thanks very much for joining us today. So with that, we thought we would kick off with some information around value-based purchasing, just in case there is somebody out there on the line who is not familiar with the concept. So value-based purchasing really took off with the Affordable Care Act, sometimes known as Obamacare. Medicare is the largest payer of healthcare in the United States at about 60% of all payments. So the government carries a pretty big stick. In an effort to drive down runaway costs, CMS, the Centers for Medicare Services, created a holdback, and it's 2% in 2018. So CMS is holding back 2% of Medicare payments to hospitals. Hospitals can earn that holdback back through performance measures. And today we're here to discuss a portion of that holdback, which is HCAHPS. So if you are a typical 300-bed hospital with a 50% Medicare payer mix, you've likely got about $1 million on the line thanks to value-based purchasing. VBP is broken down into safety, clinical care, efficiency, and cost reduction, and patient experience. So today, we're going to focus on the patient experience component, which is, of course, HCAHPS. So with around $1 million on the line, we thought it might be good to take a run through HCAHPS achievement and hopefully help you articulate the rules to the rest of your organization. So to that end, we break down value-based purchasing into a grading scale, something that we can all relate to from school. So Clayton, based on the grading scale that we have here on the screen, it seems like there are two important concepts to keep in mind. I wonder if you could walk us through them.
Absolutely. So let's start at the top. The benchmark is the score at which you get full credit for that HCAHPS dimension. On a typical GPA scale, that'd be like getting a 4.0, and so this is the lowest score that gets you an A. The achievement threshold, by contrast, is the first point at which you begin to earn any points at all. And, again, on a traditional grade scale, that would map to D-.
All right, Clayton, and I apologize because it looks like we had some technical difficulties there, but the screen is now up, so hopefully everybody can see the scale. All right, so I wonder, you just talked about the achievement threshold, that at the bottom, and then there's the benchmark up there around A-. What do these two things mean when it comes to reimbursement?
Sure. So the benchmark is the overachievers. It's the people who are going to get back more than the withholding from CMS. Unsurprisingly, the achievement threshold at the other extreme will be folks who aren't going to get as much money back. We're going to lose some money on value-based purchasing.
Okay, so those are the overachievers and maybe the underachievers. At what point could a hospital, say, break even on that holdback?
Yeah, it takes around a C- for a typical hospital.
Okay, and for everybody on the line, don't worry. We're going to line up these letter grades with actual scores within HCAHPS, just so you know approximately where you might be. But Clayton, it sounds like the achievement threshold is where you start to achieve dollar number one.
Yeah, so that's the point at which you achieve, or you start to earn your first achievement point. But to encourage hospitals below the achievement threshold to work on HCAHPS, CMS also offers something called improvement points.
Okay, hang on. So there's the benchmark, there's the achievement threshold, but you're also going to get some improvement points. Tell us about that.
Sure, yeah. So improvement points are almost exactly what they sound like. For hospitals who are below the achievement threshold but are making year-over-year improvements in their raw score, they are able to earn probably only 1 or 2 improvement points year over year. The problem is they're fleeting.
Yeah, you mentioned in the ebook that they go away. And what does that mean by they go away?
Sure, okay. So let's do it by comparison to achievement points. So achievement points. If you earned a C last year, you earn a C again this year. So you don't have to move, right? You just kind of stay where you are. You continue to earn 5 points every single year that you stay at a C. Improvement points aren't like that. You improved this year and it resets. So if you want to earn more improvement points, you need to improve again next year. And so, as a result, it's very difficult to earn more than 1 or 2.
All right, this is starting to sound like exercise. Okay, so I know the concept, so let me maybe reiterate. We know where we can start earning in the achievement threshold. I know where I hit parity, it's around a C-, and then I also know where I can overachieve up there around the benchmark. Now, once upon a time, an A was a 90, a B was an 80, a C was a 70. So Clayton, as long as I'm hitting a 70, I should feel pretty confident that I'm earning back my hospital's money, right?
So unfortunately, no. The grading scale for each question isn't fixed numbers. It's actually based on historical data for the same question. So on this slide, we can see the actual numbers that will be the basis for your 2018 performance. So this is all calculated based on the performance of all hospitals in 2016. And it's important to understand these numbers for 2 reasons. The first is, of course, how well you're really doing. So if we look at the achievement threshold column, on half the questions, 70 doesn't actually score you any points at all, any achievement points.
Right.
The second reason to understand where these numbers really are is because there are different gaps or impacts based on which dimension you're working on. So let me give you some specific examples. So if we look at the third column or third row from the bottom, discharge information, the distance between the center column achievement threshold and the right column benchmark is only 5 percentage points in raw score. Now, all 10 achievement points are jammed into that little 5 percentage point range. As a result, you only need to improve your raw score by 0.5 percentage point to earn an extra achievement point. At the other extreme, we can look at responsiveness, the third from the top. The gap between the achievement threshold and the benchmark is actually 15 percentage points, 15 raw points in score. So to earn an extra achievement point, you may need to improve your score by as much as 1.5%. That's triple the improvement in discharge information. And so investments in different dimensions can really have asymmetric impacts on your final score.
Yeah, and that's fascinating because I've certainly been in organizations that are simply trying to improve by a point. So they get together, they try to set some goals, and the goal is simply let's improve by a percentage point, which perhaps is not sophisticated enough to really take advantage of whichever domain or dimension you're trying to improve.
Mm-hmm.
So Clayton, there's one other concept that I'm seeing here on this chart that we haven't really touched upon, and it's called the floor. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. So we've already talked about achievement points. We've already talked about improvement points. The last component in the HCAHPS part of value-based purchasing is something called consistency points. And these exist to encourage a hospital to work on their worst or lowest score. And so what happens is if your lowest dimension falls below the floor, you get 0 points for consistency. If your lowest dimension is above the achievement threshold, you get the full 20 points. If you fall somewhere in between, you get somewhere in between. And so most hospitals are earning some consistency points because the floor is actually the worst a hospital ever did in 2016. It's not terribly easy to fall below that.
So if I want to make myself feel a little bit better, perhaps I just go check out the floor every once in a while, and I know at least I'm not there.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I understand where the scores line up with the letter grades that we were talking about before. I understand approximately where I need to be to hit my achievement, my earn back, and the benchmark. So I guess as long as I maintain an overall rating around the mid-70s, I should be a happy guy.
Yeah, unfortunately, again, it's not that simple. So over the last 8 years, the scores on these dimensions have been increasing, in some cases by almost a percentage point a year. So if you aren't improving a percentage point a year in those same dimensions, you're actually falling behind.
Wait, so I actually have to improve where the curve is headed in addition to all of that work I've done to improve.
Yeah, that's right. So if you want to earn an extra achievement point, you need to earn the percentage point to chase the curve. Then you need to earn the extra 0.5 to 1.5 percentage points to improve your improvement points. So, you need to run faster than the treadmill.
Okay, so I think I've got it. So I know how we're being graded. I know where the thresholds are. I know the approximate scores related to those thresholds. I know how much money is on the line. We better get moving because everybody else in the database is working pretty hard on this. So I guess it's time to examine how organizations are approaching improvement. But first, Katie, I think we have a poll question.
That's right, Steve. Thank you. So I'm launching another poll question. If you wouldn't mind taking a moment and filling this out. This is a multi-select. So we're just wondering, where are you in the HCAHPS improvement journey? Do you have a patient experience office? Are you rounding? Are you focused on just one low-performing domain or multiple? Are you focused on domain correlation with overall success? And are you using data to help anticipate individual patient needs?
So Clayton, I know that you've been out in the field talking to hospitals. I have as well. What have you been seeing when it comes to strategies for improvement?
Sure, yeah. Well, we hear a lot of people who are focused on culture change, and understandably. I mean, we know it's an important factor. And we hear that they're spending a lot of money on consulting, especially focused on this dimension. So one of the questions we like to ask is whether people feel like the improvement they're getting is commensurate with that cost and with that effort. And unfortunately, almost universally, the answer is no.
Yeah, and I know that a lot of the work that you did, specifically with Ohio State, was around trying to save some time and energy while trying to tackle improvement when it comes to patient experience. I know a lot of people think they're putting in a lot of effort, but don't know what else that can be done. Many times they're focused on one low-performing domain, and we're seeing that, I think, also here in our survey. Majority right now, are rounding, are focused on one low-performing domain, and some are starting to use some correlations. And of course, the minority are starting to look at data to help anticipate what a patient is going to need. So this might be a good time to jump to our experience, really the state of the art in the industry right now. So really the majority of organizations that we've seen out there have the patient experience office. We're rounding because we know it's a best practice. There's some evidence behind it. But as you can see from the chart, the deeper in to sophistication that you get, the fewer organizations are actually utilizing these strategies. So let's go ahead and start breaking down these strategies a little bit. Let's start to focus on the lowest domain and utilizing some basic correlations. Some folks may not have seen these correlations. They come from CMS. However, those that have might also know that there's kind of a cottage industry out there promoting connecting with the correlated domains to try to move another domain like overall. And that can be useful, but only really to a point. Clayton, you warn us in the ebook that correlations could actually be misleading. I mean, isn't it obvious that nurse communications has a direct impact on overall rating?
Sure, absolutely. So there's no doubt that nurse communication contributes to overall rating. But when consultants come and tell you to focus on these correlated domains like nurse communication, they should be doing it because they believe that that dimension has a greater impact on overall rating than the other questions.
Well, I mean, we're seeing it here on the chart, aren't we? Isn't that exactly what correlation means?
So unfortunately, no. So it could be true, but I'd be careful about drawing that conclusion. Let's try to give you a nice concrete example of why. So the vast majority of your interactions at a hospital are with nurses. So yes, some of that interaction involves courtesy and listening and explaining, but that only covers a small part of your interactions with a nurse. What else does a nurse do for you during your stay?
Well, you know, my wife was actually recently in a car accident. She was in the hospital. I know when I came in the room, it was quite a mess, which was kind of a big deal to me. I know she was worried about our pets back at home because we had been in the hospital for a long time. Of all things, she was worried about her garage door opener and did it make it out of the car after the accident. So probably something that wouldn't be on the mind of your average nurse.
Sure, but you know, a great nurse is out there engaging and assisting and supporting you in all of these extra concerns that aren't really part of the HCAHPS.
Right.
Okay, so that's where the correlation comes from. So great nurses provide great HCAHPS dimensions and great non-HCAHPS dimensions. And so nurse communication, while it's certainly an important contributor, is only a small part of what makes a great nurse great.
Right. It only affects maybe a small percentage of all the myriad things that are going on that could be impacting my experience.
Right. And so that's why the correlation doesn't imply the causation. So the correlation exists because the great nurse is great and the bad nurse is poor, right? I mean, it's the quality of the nurse that causes all of these different experiences to move together. But that doesn't necessarily mean that one factor out of them, the communication, is what causes your overall experience to be great. It's probably having a great nurse.
Right. And so the nurse was courteous, listened, explained, but those elements are just a few of the dozens more that might be impacting my experience. So I can't trust necessarily correlations. I mean, I won't leave them behind entirely, but I know another strategy out there is focusing on, say, a low performing unit. And it sounds like perhaps you're encouraging us to go in that direction, or maybe you're going to say no again.
Well, no, this time I'm actually going to say yes. So when you focus on a high-risk unit, you're doing a very simple sort of segmentation, and it works. So if in the overall population, say only 30% of patients complain, you break them down by unit, and there's a unit where 35% of people complain, well, sure, yeah, then going to that unit and asking that question of that unit makes sense. You're spending more time talking to people who have that problem. And if you have no other option, it works.
Okay, great. So I guess I'm done. That's what I'm going to do. Are we finished?
So no, the thing is, yeah, great. You've gotten from 30% to 35%, and that's fantastic. But if only 35% of the people are complaining, almost 2/3 of the people you talk to aren't actually complaining. They aren't actually concerned about this dimension that you're super focused on. So for some organizations, that's pain. We go ask everybody pain. Wouldn't you really be better off talking to the people who aren't going to complain about pain about a different dimension, about something they care about, another HCAHPS dimension, or maybe one of these non-HCAHPS concerns that really improves their quality of life?
Well, I mean, of course, it sounds like you're wasting potentially 60% of the time. Maybe you're even irritating that other 60% of folks that you're talking to about pain who didn't have a pain problem in the first place. So I get it. You're suggesting that we focus on where the effort has the most impact and where I should be spending my time.
Absolutely. And that lets you really focus all that extra time on what matters to the rest of the population.
But man, how do we even do that? I mean, how could we possibly get more accurate? I know about correlations because CMS posted that chart. I know which units are performing poorly, but I honestly don't know that much about my patients. How do we get to that level of sophistication?
Sure. So it turns out that it's actually possible to predict a patient's preferences based on characteristics of that patient, information you know about them before you've even had a conversation with them. But let's use a nice concrete example again to help us get it. Okay, so Steve, do you have kids?
I do.
Okay, so you had certain ideas about the cleanliness of your home, about the amount of sleep you get. What happened to those ideas when you first had kids?
I don't care about those things anymore.
Well, maybe you still care, but your expectations dropped precipitously. And how about as they've grown up? Have that affected other expectations of yours?
Yes. Now that I'm older and I have teenagers, I've found that courtesy and respect have also left the house.
Great. Yeah. Okay. So we understand that there are characteristics of a patient that can really help us understand what they are likely to be concerned about. And so this was the germination of this patient insights work developed at Ohio State. And so they saw this, they thought, boy, if we could just figure out who was going to be concerned, we could really focus on the individualized risk. And so they ran a pilot. They developed an algorithm that predicted who was going to be concerned about overall rating. They took the 40 riskiest patients and ran a pilot. Now, turns out they didn't have time to visit all 40 of those risky patients. They ended up running what's known as a natural experiment. So this is really great. I mean, it was fantastic that we had access to this information. So what could we see? The people that they didn't identify, obviously their public scores, we could compare those to the people they identified, but who they didn't visit. So this is just purely algorithmic identification. And you could see that these folks were significantly more likely to complain on that particular question. They also, because they only visited half the patients, gave us some other really great information. We could compare the patients they didn't visit or identified and didn't visit with the patients that were identified and did visit. And so we could actually see that by intervening on these patients, by visiting these patients, they were able to improve the unweighted patient experience score for these patients by 15 points. So significant and very important. It's not so helpful to know who's going to complain if you can't do anything about it. Since that pilot, we've of course expanded on the work. We've studied all the HCAHPS dimensions, and that really allows us to provide very deep, individualized predictions about each patient's specific issues.
No, that's fantastic, Clayton. And in the earlier example that we used, you talked about that 30% of patients where pain might indeed be an issue, and we need to talk about pain. But it sounds like because we're able to identify those demographics, the predispositions, the other dimensions, you're spending your time a lot more wisely when you are interacting with those other 60 to make sure that they're having an experience that's perhaps better than, we're being far more sophisticated than other organizations might be.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously we're talking a little bit about how my rounding has chosen to incorporate that science, the science that you were working on, and use this algorithm in our rounding technology. We call it patient experience risk assessment. If you take a look at the graphic there, you might see it has a high, medium, low. What we're trying to do is we're trying to equip the nursing team with these variables so they can make sure that they're spending their time both wisely and hope that they're making an impact with the limited time that they have. So we're truly serving it up at the point of care before the nurse walks into the room to make sure that they're well prepared to have that conversation. Clayton, thanks so much for helping to walk us through value-based purchasing. Thanks also about talking about this very sophisticated way that we might be able to accelerate our improvement. Let's do a quick recap. So we know that the average 300-bed hospital has about $1 million tied to value-based purchasing each year. We know that if you achieve a C or about a C- on HCAHPS, you could net the full reimbursement from HCAHPS within VBP. The curve is improving every year, so if you're standing still, you're likely going backwards. Chasing correlations doesn't yield the results needed to stay ahead. And I do know that a lot of organizations are specifically just going after those correlations right now. Working on unit level improvements is just marginally better. But if you are incorporating multiple variables unique to the patient, the condition, and the location, if you focus your efforts, place the patient at the center of your strategy, and avoid teaching just solely to the test, you're likely to have a much more rapid improvement. With that, I'd like to thank everybody for your time. And Katie, I think you've got some closing remarks.
I do. Thank you, Steve and Clayton, for joining us today and walking us through this very complex topic. And we do realize that it is very complex, so please ask any of your questions in the questions box on the right-hand side. There is no stupid question. We understand that this is very complex, even with the analogy. So send them all our way. We do see a couple coming in. It looks like some people are typing, so we'll give you a few minutes to type those in. While you're doing that, I did want to go over just a couple of housekeeping things. As a reminder, there will be a copy of this recording and the slides that will be sent out tomorrow in an email, so be on the lookout for that. If you do have additional questions after we hang up this webinar today, feel free to email us at info@myrounding.com. That actually gets sent to quite a few of us, and we will make sure that your question is answered as quickly as we can. Also, if you haven't downloaded the ebook, please do that in the handouts panel on the right-hand side. It has a lot of this great information in one distilled place. Also, when you close the webinar window, you'll be prompted to take a survey. It's just a couple of questions, and this really helps us get a sense of what we can do better in the future and what you are looking for to help us curate this content. Finally, make sure to check back to our website for future ebooks and webinars. We have exciting premium content offers or ebooks coming out for the rest of the year, so we're excited to bring those to you shortly.
So Clayton, we do have a question here, and it was about HCAHPS and the fact that HCAHPS within value-based purchasing could potentially have an outsized impact on reimbursement. Could you talk a little bit about the HCAHPS dimension and how you could earn back perhaps even a little bit more if you do well with an HCAHPS?
Yeah, so, okay. HCAHPS, starting in, I think, 2018, is now broken down into the 4 different dimensions you mentioned earlier. And on paper, they each contribute 25% of the final score. But some of the dimensions have very little variance. So, you know, the best people are only a couple of points above the worst people. Turns out that for HCAHPS, the variance is much larger. There's a much more significant gap between the best performers and the worst performers. So even though mathematically HCAHPS is only worth about 25%, or worth exactly 25% of the final score, it turns out that high performers in HCAHPS can compensate for a lot more than the other dimensions. And conversely, of course, low performers can actually drag the score down a lot further than somebody who was a low performer on one of the other dimensions.
Great. Okay.
All right, we have another question here, and it's about the chart that was the curve chart. Over time, so they're wondering what the metrics are from those lines. Are they showing the achievement threshold or the benchmark? What are those lines actually?
I believe that was the achievement threshold, though I don't have it. Oh, hold on. I may be able to tell you exactly. I'm sure this is the achievement threshold. Oh, actually, I can just compare it to the next chart, and I can tell you exactly. So if you look at the far right, it's about an 88 on discharge information, 86. And so that number lines up with the That lines up with the achievement threshold. Yeah, so if you look at where it is on the chart, you compare it to the achievement threshold column, there's 1 extra year of data here, or 2 extra years of data, but that's alignment. So it's all achievement threshold.
Great.
Great, thanks, Clayton. Another question that came in, how do you coach nurses to focus on the non-HCAHPS related variables?
Boy, I mean, you know, it's a skill, and it's about management. I mean, you know, I don't know that I have any magic. We're really focused on giving them the insights that help them ask the right questions. It takes a skilled nurse to get beyond the tests. I mean, yeah, I don't know. Steve, do you have any other insight?
Yeah, and you know, and Clayton obviously has spent a lot of time on the data and the data science. So there's data science there that can certainly help us part of the way. But we're talking about some of those intangibles. And one of the nice things, and one of the things I'm really proud about when it comes to my rounding, is a component that we call personal preferences. And those personal preferences are something that you can capture within the tool. One of our favorite rounding questions that we like to ask right off the front is, what's most important to you today? So before we dive into what's your pain, before we dive into has the nurse communicated clearly with you, we ask what's most important for you today. And that's where we really start to get a pretty nice data set to identify. And in fact, we could even see it perhaps start to instruct an algorithm like the one that we talked about today, where we identify based on demographics what they typically tell us is most important to them today. So I think that asking specifically to the patient what's important, also asking or identifying what their preferences are, is incredibly important and can also lead to a great patient experience.
Yeah, and Steve, that goes to sort of a good point, which is a lot of nurses don't like the idea of just having to track data. They feel like it's a burden. And, you know, if you don't track the data, we can never get proactive about anticipating those needs. I mean, we're stuck with things like HCAHPS survey scores, and, you know, we really want to get beyond that.
Right.
Great. Well, those are the only questions that came in. So thank you for those of you who submitted questions and were participating throughout the webinar with the polls, as well as for joining us today. So with that, we will close down this webinar. Again, if you do have any questions, feel free to email us and we will get you an answer. And thank you again for joining us. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.